Call this meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee to order. Is Wednesday, October 11th, 6:32 p.m. Present from the committee are myself, Mr. Hollowell, Mr. Kaufman, also present Mr. Farrington. I didn't get a call from Mr. Mosier that he was interested in calling in, so I don't know how that's been working routinely, but he's not here. Also present Mr. Donovan, Dr. Mosley, and Mr. Smith.
1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Preamble.
All right, and I'll give you the heads up, Howard, that my intention is to be here for the Elm Street and the Mount Pleasant construction discussion, and then you and George can wrap up the meeting, if that's all right with you. I just feel
Not a problem.
can be here for a while, but not that long.
Surprised you don't have a mask on. You're that bad.
I've got some pretty heavy antibiotics going on, so I think we're okay.
Your second.
All right, so we're going to talk about Elm Street and Mount Pleasant construction. Let's start with Mr. Donovan.
Well, since we have the experts here, I will immediately turn it over. Well, much more of an expert than I am. So, Sean, do you want to say anything, or just turn it over to Carl?
Yeah, just as a preamble, so we've tasked Harriman with doing 2 studies at 2 different locations. So was it for Mount Pleasant and Elm Street? They first did a facility analysis, which looks at the physical characteristics of the building. And not so much how suitable it is for education necessarily, just the physical attributes of the building. And the second study was we were calling it the educational specifications. Therein they take a look at what the school building looks like and compare that to state standards. So we probably receive 4 reports.
4, yeah, exactly.
So two for each school.
Yeah. And we certainly will pass these out.
Oh, Jesus. Thank you, Howard. Oops. Let's fill out the chair.
Stay in the wrong corner. Oh, they're all different. I mean, they're all same, sorry. Always something. I was just passing around a spreadsheet. This takes the number that Harvey Construction came up with an estimate for the 2 projects, and then tacks on all the soft costs for construction. So that gives you a ballpark number where the real cost.
I guess Sean must have it already.
I have it already, yes.
These are different sizes.
Correct. Yep, you should have one Mount Pleasant, and it should say educational assessment. And then you should have
2.
Whatever I was given, I gave to each of us. I didn't hold on
it
to
was
them.
one packet.
Oh, okay, so we did that completely wrong.
I have 2 facility.
Okay.
I blame Howard.
That's all on me, absolutely.
No, that's okay.
All right, so I have 2 facilities.
So we have, this is new, so I haven't messed that one up.
Okay, all right. So
So these last 2 should,
so you should have.
in other words, these are the first 2 that I held on to that I should have passed on.
What is this?
That was a complete set?
A complete set, yep.
Okay, so maybe if that goes to Dan,
First
Yeah.
facility. That's the facility. I don't know what you have over there.
you should have 4 different
I
ones.
feel like you could end up with like 3 of a kind and maybe win something at the table.
It's gonna be a like fish thing.
So if-
There's, you get it.
So I have, so should we have, I have Mount Pleasant,
You have 2.
I have Mount Pleasant educational and facility analysis.
There's a complete set.
Okay.
Elm
And it's
Street.
Elm Street facility analysis.
Okay, I have a complete set. Dr. Mosley has a complete set. These, I
So I'm
think,
missing
go to you
Elm
guys.
Street.
So an Elm Street.
Educational?
Yep.
Okay, excuse me for the reach.
There we go. All right. How you doing down there, George? Have you got a set of something?
No, I'm just watching here. I didn't want to get in the middle. It looked like it was going so smoothly. Didn't want to mess it up. Thank you.
So, problem solving at the executive level.
There we go.
All right.
Yes, Dr. Michael.
Right here. There you are. There's 3.
And that makes 4.
Thank you.
That's a copy for the office.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll put that in here so that Jackie knows that.
Did we want a copy for Mr. Mosier?
Yeah.
And one for you. Very good. So I don't know who wants to start. If you want to recap the studies, I think we'll kind of give a quick overview. We have in the past, I think, already reviewed in some level of detail the facility studies of both schools sometime back, and then at our last meeting, we gave a cursory overview as well of some of the educational findings. But we'll summarize those. Dan, you want to grab the boards and set them up? We'll first go through a recap of Mount Pleasant.
Let's see if we can set those up in such a way that he can get them on the
Absolutely.
camera.
Bring them down.
Come closer to the camera.
There we go. Let us know if that works.
Are these in these documents?
They are.
Okay, so
Yep.
just point out where they are so we can see them.
Absolutely. So, if you turn to, if you find the Mount Pleasant Educational Assessment and tab number 6,
Okay.
so we have a floor plan indicating the educational assessment findings for each level, and some of the basic findings are the where you see a colored square that indicates that there's a deficiency in that area, and so a lot of it dealt with, for instance, the kindergarten rooms are under the state standard of 1,000 square feet for a kindergarten room. We have a lack of toilet rooms throughout the facility, and that actually impacts the educational programming with the number of the amount of time that's spent waiting for toilets. The other aspects of the kitchen is pretty far below the state standards. You can see that, 329. We're not quite sure how you're serving much out of a 330 square foot kitchen. It's well, what you see is you'll see some dashed squares in the cafeteria, and that's because coolers and things have migrated out to that area. Well, those have compressors that are loud, and that impacts the use of those facilities as well. The art rooms are closer to the square foot standards that the state requires, but there's still a little bit less. And then again, there's a few classrooms as well. The first grade classroom is marginally below. When we move from kindergarten, the preschool and kindergarten level to the first grade, the requirement goes from 1,000 to 900 in the state standard. So again, those are marginal and probably function fairly well from that perspective. Most of the kindergarten rooms have toilets. I think they all do, but some of them are older and they're not ADA compliant, and so those are noted as well. One of the other significant impacts or issues with the school, while an elevator was added, and you can see that between the kindergarten rooms on the right-hand side of the page, that's helpful. However, there is still an issue that the building itself is on a sloped site, and the entrance is at a split level and remote from the administration, and so that's a concern regarding security. On the first floor, turning to the next level, one of the findings is, and we see this in a number of schools, is that when additional program space is needed, you look for every corner of a space, an office or a closet or anything you can to find appropriate program space. The library was originally intended to have 4 rooms in the corners that actually served library functions, and most of those have all been converted to other programs. One's behavior, one's an after-school office, one houses special education, and then there's a storage that was intended as library storage, but I think it's used for a number of different items now. you'll see that speech is also in an area that originally was not, it was never conceived of as an office. It's an interior space without any windows. The staff toilet, you can see the one staff toilet on this level, and that's a single user toilet. As mentioned, the administration area in green is remote from the entrance. And then you can see the toilet, or the classrooms on the right-hand side are again marginally below the 900 square foot level for that. There is some, you'll see a note on the lower right-hand corner, just teaching space in the corridor. And so it's at a point where now some of the needed space is sort of been pulled out of the classroom and into some of the corridors, and that's oftentimes a concern regarding the decreasing of the corridor widths, so that in an emergency you've actually reduced the egress capacity or impaired it to a degree. Gymnasium is sort of, I guess, it was larger than the original gymnasium, but it's at 2,400 square feet. It's smaller than what we normally would do for a facility of this size. It seems to function fairly well, but again, it's certainly not a full-size gym, and it's probably, again, at a reasonable level for the capacity of this school. Dan, anything else that you want to mention on this?
Yes, also what's crept into different nooks and crannies is the stair to the far right. Underneath the stairs is used for storage space. That really is a tough situation. They just can't find places. Administration-wise, for support for conference, the only place they really have a conference room is the lower left-hand side is the collaboration room. So they keep booking that, and there's 2 people who work in there. So while the conference are being, there's a conference room, they're trying to get some work done. The other thing is the staff toilets. There are 2 designated in the entire building. And also some of the smaller bathrooms, which were primarily for classrooms, are being shared by boys and girls to go to different levels. So the girls are downstairs, the boys are upstairs. It is just a lack of space. Storage is a premium throughout the whole building. But the general classrooms actually, for capacity, do meet the capacity needs. It's all the other support services that really are what's making this facility difficult to operate.
And just when they did add the classroom additions on the right and left-hand sides of the older building, they actually did a decent job in terms of the design of those and creating shared pull-out space that is accessible from the classroom itself. And so in some ways there was actually a reasonably progressive design thought at that time when they did those. So moving from the first floor up to the second floor, much the same. The hatched red classrooms are, again, marginally below, but not significantly. And we can see, again, the Accomodus staff toilet in the right off of the teacher's workroom in the center, and so, but fewer items in terms of deficiency from the second floor plan, the third level. Any questions on any of those items? Yeah.
Thank you. So the 900 square foot requirement for a classroom, is that based on population in the building, or what is, in other words, if we have X number of students, then it needs to be this square footage for each class?
That's the minimum standard for the Department of Ed, is 900 square feet. It's based on 30 square feet per student, which gives you about 25 students per classroom.
Okay.
And in the past, I mean, what we've also looked at is, well, what is the capacity then if we're slightly lower than that, using the same space standard, and to sort of work backwards to say how many pupils would be the state.
Square foot per
Exactly.
student.
Yeah, exactly. The
Exactly.
Department of Ed, if you have an existing classroom of 840, they'll accept it, but they'll ask you to actually downsize the number of students by dividing by 36. But when you start getting below the below 840, 820s, they get nervous because it really is going to be a really small classroom.
So in general, those 840 and above would be safe?
Would be safe to bet that the Department of Ed, if you did keep them, they would work with you.
Dr. Moses?
I just have a real quick question, and maybe this comes up later. Is there some limitations on the space of the rooms because this building is located in the historic district of the city, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the challenge, you can see sort of these very heavy wall thicknesses in most of the rooms, and that is sort of the good bet that that's a structurally load-bearing wall. The masonry wall is heavier ones, and so the degree of flexibility to change those is pretty limited.
Expensive.
Yeah. We'll leave that to Carl's pricing, but that's absolutely correct. So in general, the staff like the scale of the building, and the layout is fairly straightforward, but again, certainly the shortcomings make it a little more challenging. And so next we'll pick up the educational assessment for the Elm Street, and we can again flip to the.
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question before you jump
please.
to the
Absolutely.
next school?
Sure, certainly.
So, is there a recommendation that's attached to this?
We at
Or
this
we
point.
we haven't asked you to.
We haven't,
recommend?
exactly, we haven't gone through from this to put forward a design or to resolve some of these issues, so no, we haven't.
The only one we attempted to is look at having an entrance that would be on the lower level, so it'd be security and people being able to come in. Also in the facilities analysis, we actually drew a site plan to try to get a loop road, so there'd be a drop-off and pickup area off the main drag.
Correct.
So the facilities was basically the facility and its function of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, its plant, where the educational was based on education primarily.
Okay, thank you.
So in the cost estimate that you have, it's strictly regarding the specified renovations that were identified, nothing to do with programming.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But like one solution for the smaller sizes, that's slightly less than 900 square foot, as Howard pointed out, right, is you could be very strict about how many students you allow to be in those schools, right? So it's an indirect cost because you can't have as many kids
Right.
in the classroom.
That's right.
But this tends to be a very small school anyway, so you may be able to manage some of those, right?
Yes.
The toilets and stuff like that are a whole different
A different
issue.
story where
correct.
you should bring more toilets, and the ADA accessibility is another issue with some of the toilet facilities.
How many toilets are recommended on a floor, or is it per kindergarten room?
It's
or-
actually a plumbing code, number of toilets in the facility.
And so it's based on the population of the number of students in the facility itself, and so we can adequately say that you're under by a considerable level. I don't know that we've actually done the calculation, but but we can certainly do that.
Maybe a half a dozen, or even more? Close?
The issue is also staff
No,
toilets, there's
yeah,
only
right.
two. We
Yeah,
I know.
definitely
exactly.
should have two each on each floor.
But to make the current ones ADA compliant,
It's steel
you
spaces.
steal space from
Right.
what's already
Where
there,
we
so you're
stopped
losing,
from there, yeah.
you're actually losing fixtures.
And in addition to that, to actually meet the code, you'll end up adding numbers.
I'm
So
sorry.
you're right, you're absolutely right. And in terms of the number, my thinking is that probably overall in the entire school, you'll probably end up with as many as 6 per gender. And that's not including staff.
So
Mr.
where would we
Frank.
find the space to add the toilets?
Well,
Within the
I'm sure there'll be no problem, we just put porta potties outside.
It's gonna be the outside wall is
that was
what
gonna
I
be
Right,
was
we use
my
very old porta potties so that
That
they're
was gonna be
historically
my
accurate.
antique outhouses, you mean?
right.
So, and
Half
the other
moons.
question was, I mean, I understand about the 900 versus 850 square feet, but what about in the kindergarten where it's 1,000 versus 850? What are we looking at? there?
Same basic issue, but you've got a greater deficit in terms of the size, and so, but it's a similar approach where you would restrict the numbers. And in kindergarten and preschool, the allotment per pupil is actually much greater than, Dan, is it 50 or?
It's 50 square feet
Yeah.
per student on a kindergarten. If you
Okay,
went
so-
to tab 5, there's the present school capacity, and it's
Okay.
done by grade, and it's got the square footage required by DOE, and we did the math on the right-hand side by reducing the number of students.
I thought we might get away with it because we only have 20, a max of 20, but there's 1,000 right there.
Correct.
Yeah, 882, for instance, allowed up to 18 students. And it's all
Okay.
on that tab,
Yeah.
tab 5, to give you the calculation.
What happens if we don't do it?
You continue to operate the way you are. I mean, these are primarily guidelines, and I think they only come into effect if you were to, if the state were to move forward with facility funding, in which case they would require you, if you were
Okay.
using their funding.
It's
to,
good practice to follow the guidelines.
No, yeah, I understand.
Just as, because it's set forth by the state as.
So we can continue with the situation we have, we don't run in, and the inconveniences that are part of that. But it's only if we accept state funding for a rehabilitation.
And if you do a renovation, you should adhere
Have
to.
to the current
you
code.
You should adhere to the guidelines. You're not forced to, but you should be doing that.
And at this point in time, there is no state funding,
No.
so
That's right.
They can't impose, they can still impose if
Yeah,
you
but-
renovate, right?
right.
But
Now, they're
there-
trying to get that back, but they've been unsuccessful for about 4 years.
So what do we do? Knock out one wall and it's a series of toilet facilities for staff and kids and,
Then you start cutting into your classroom.
Now you're
That's-
taking away from.
no, I mean, no, literally.
An exterior.
Oh, right, on the
Exterior,
outside
yeah,
of the
yes.
building.
The way they did it
Right.
100 years ago
Right.
when they added the bathrooms. They went through the wall and they
Right.
put toilets in. So I
And you
mean,
look for a spot that you can do an addition,
yeah.
and there's very limited places. We've talked about different possibilities, but it's very limited.
But irrespective of the funding, state funding potential of that, you still, if you're gonna renovate, have to meet the codes. So the building code department's going to require that we make sure everything's ADA compliant.
But to Mr. Farrington's comment, that's if we renovate.
Right.
Based on the
Well-
value that you're expending. Yeah,
You
that
need
can
a
be
building
also-
permit, so it kicks in the building codes.
Will it impact accreditation in any way by having less than recommended?
There's, again, secondary schools are accredited. I don't know how much there is in the way of a primary school accreditation.
So there's, I mean, there could be some internal accreditation pieces at the state level, but when you talk about MEAS,
Yeah.
it's basically for like secondary, so.
Okay.
Right,
Um,
right.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it is, yeah. They would cite, in a secondary school, they would cite
Absolutely.
Insufficient. yeah.
insufficient space
Okay.
or size of classrooms.
All right, thank you.
All right, Elm Street.
All right. Let's see. And
Tab
so,
6 again?
Dan, you got the boards there? All right, swapping them.
Take them on this side.
Seems to see a lot of undersized down here.
Can you explain when you get to a deficiency plan? I mean, that's an interesting, Term there.
Terminology, and again, this is as it compares with the state guidelines, and so deficient in those areas, so.
I think we're a little out of order here. Get that ground. As an adjunct to this one. It's like a puzzle.
Rubik's Cube.
Oh, wow.
So basically, the ground floor, we broke it up into two parts that just wouldn't physically fit on a board. And then there's the first, second, and third, so it's a four-story building.
And so, right now, I'm looking at Part A, again, this is under tab 6 of the Elm Street educational study. And I'm starting sort of from the left side of the page and working right. one of the aspects is in the music area, its location isn't necessarily in a bad part of the building. It's actually adjacent to the stage, which is really good, and it's away from most of the classroom areas, which is also good. But there's the acoustics are poor in them. There are a lot of hard surfaces, even with that angled wall. There's still some pretty tough acoustics there. There's a real lack of flexibility. You can see all those ringed, and that's the actual floor that has the built-in risers in it. And again, that's really difficult, both from an accessibility point of view, and also just from a use of the building. I mean, of the space itself. There's a lack of storage, in particular, in that area, and so some of the practice rooms. There's one that's there, but there's other functions that moved over. There's an office C7 that used to be part of the music program, which is co-opted for other uses right now. And so again, that's and the systems of the building are extremely tired too. And so there's some acoustic issues in those rooms. Nowadays, we would have mechanical systems that would be quiet enough for some, and we would also the separation acoustically between two very loud spaces like that would be designed in such a way as to provide a much greater level of isolation from one music room to the other. The art rooms, again, are undersized to the state standards, and so you can read what they are. There's around 270 or 280 square feet difference from the 1,200 square foot. On one of them, you have two art rooms. One of them actually is
Pretty close.
Pretty close, exactly. And then you'll see the rooms themselves in the central T section of the building, the classroom, the primary classroom wings. The classrooms themselves are, again, they're sort of developed at a time when standards were lower, and so they're less than the 900 square foot that we would allocate nowadays. And one of the aspects of the conversion of this from a high school to a junior high to a middle school is that the arrangement of spaces is, while there are teams in team teaching at the school itself, the arrangement of spaces doesn't support the team teaching, and the building itself doesn't provide the common spaces in teams that are kind of an important aspect of the social development that occurs at the middle school level. And so you'll see it's very departmentally organized with sort of a straight corridor with classrooms on either side. And so that's sort of a hallmark of the building being designed in the sort of 30s and sort of the aspect of the legacy of its construction. On the right-hand side, we start moving into the spaces that were added in the 60s in the special education areas. And a lot of the special ed are in a fairly good location from the respective of the people that are using those spaces. But they weren't originally designed as special education. You can see the three blue rooms there on the right-hand side don't have access to outside windows. And so, again, internal rooms, oftentimes it's the effect of being inside in a space like that for hours on end without much. There's a little bit from a courtyard window that comes into those spaces, but they're really not the way we would design classrooms now. We provide windows in all of our normally occupied classroom spaces. The nurse area is a little bit on the small side. They're comfortable with it, but again, the toilet room is not ADA compliant. It doesn't have a shower in it, and the exam room also is a little bit on the small side. And there's a cot in the nurse office area, if you will. Dan, anything else?
Yes. The other part is the library. Basically, access on the ground floor is a two-level, is an upper level with a mezzanine. Library square footage is accommodating DOE, but there's some other spaces that have taken over like computer lab, Chromebook. And upstairs in the mezzanine, it's used for teachers to gather groups of students. Some of the team teaching is occurred there with 2 or 3 classrooms. And it's very difficult to manage to have a secure situation where books and supplies can go in the mezzanine. There's access to a corridor, so it's difficult. So the librarian would really love to have this reconfigured, redesigned into more modern, and also the technologies in there are lacking.
You'll also see on the upper left-hand that the portable, there's an 8th grade team in portable structures that are remote from the rest of the building. So that's obviously not a long-term solution. Should be addressed as part of, and we actually, in this one, there was more work with a renovation option that incorporated those classrooms into a renovation that I think Harvey's priced. Is that right, Carl?
Correct.
They're long-term, but they've been sitting there for 17 years so far.
Sorry, can I interrupt before do we have another set of those that we could give to the telegraph reporter while she's here?
Absolutely.
This was the one intended for Mr. Mosher. Would you like me to give that?
And we've got another one we can give Superintendent
You really want to do it?
I don't mind.
I have
I
a,
can
You have an extra one over there?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We got a few extras.
Mark, the other thing on the auditorium is in the back end at the lobby is very small, and there's 2 sets of toilets, 3 water closets each. It's very, very difficult to have a venue with just 6 toilets, so that's a big issue. Also coming in from the lobby to the auditorium rear, there is kind of a makeshift ramp to the right that doesn't need ADA, and that whole back end needs quite a bit of thoughts, and we came up with an addition that would help alleviate ADA accessibility and the connectability from the outside. And that was in our facility analysis.
Good point. The auditorium, again, is a wonderful asset to have at a middle school level, and in particular, the capacity that is at this one. But as Dan mentioned, there's been some investment at the sort of the technical side of it in the stage house, but there's some accessibility issues as well as finish issues with the auditorium that were, I think, identified in the facilities study. In part B, this is the sort of top half of the building, and the cafeteria, in addition to the challenges that were identified structurally in the facility study, the arrangement of it is problematic for several reasons. There's no clear separation from the serving area to the kitchen itself, and so that's and the serving area actually separates the kitchen from the dishwashing, which means that you actually have to cross that path when you're actually bringing dishes back and forth from the kitchen itself to the dishwashing area. The entrance, one of the primary entrances, you can see it says cafeteria lobby to the left, that wedge, is an extremely small and constricted entrance for the number of the volume of traffic that comes in and out of that area. And so that adds a dimension to behavioral aspects when a lot of people are trying to move through a narrow area that at one time. You can see on the right-hand side, again, the blue squares, and this is continuation of a discussion we talked about in Part A, but a lot of special education classroom areas that were carved out of space originally from the tech ed wing of the high school, and so many of them are internal, don't have exterior windows, and some of them are adjacent to the loading areas and have had some complaints about at times fumes coming into the room itself, and again that's just the fact of taking large spaces and carving them up to smaller ones that didn't have and not having access to exterior windows. The gymnasium is actually a great size. The 12,000 square foot gymnasium is a wonderful, again, at a middle school of this size, having the 2 gyms is probably viewed by the athletic department as being necessary, but it's also, again, a good resource. There's the lobby that's outside the gym lobby is a secondary entrance, and you can see the capacity there relative to the capacity we were just talking about, the primary entrance to the cafeteria area. But it's actually used for storage, as well as, I think, some sports cheering, I think, uses it as a space to actually conduct their practices. And then you'll see in green the girls' and boys' locker rooms, which are not accessible, and if anyone's toured the facility, they'll understand, I guess, why the word deficiency is indeed appropriate for those two spaces. They're really in tough shape, again, Dan, I'll turn it over to you for any other comments.
Also in the split level boys and girls locker room, the showers are fairly old. The boys is a gang shower, the ladies is a private shower, but the drying area is a common area, and it doesn't get much use. And it's a fairly large area, and that's why we're kind of recommending if that were to be removed, for a couple of reasons. One is ADA accessibility. Put an elevator in there, that's going to take up more space. But if you were to remove the two and consolidate into one level, the stairs would become usable space, because right now it's travel up and down two corners. So we were thinking of revisiting how much of a necessity do you need that kind of space. You could still have the boys and girls on one floor, still have some showers and some toilets, but not of the same quantity. It might improve the circulation usability of those lockers and shower rooms if they were on one level.
And not all is negative necessarily. One of the things of special ed location, what they like it for is actually being close to a lot of the functions of the school, but not being in the middle of it. And the other thing they really liked was the courtyard closest to the special ed area. They actually use that as both recreation space as well as educational space, and so that afforded them some outside space, if you will, that was secure.
Just a general question, I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, or if that's part of another study or whatever. We have X number of rooms on a floor. Let's say they all need a minimum of 900 to be feasible, because we're not dealing with the kindergarten, I'm talking the middle school here. So we just divide by whatever the space is, by 900, or taking out the restrooms that you need, and you just, so let's say we have 20 rooms there now, given what we have on a given floor. And by the time we add some bathrooms and whatever adjustments are necessary, that 20, I don't know, say it becomes an 18 or something like that. That's really what ultimately happens with the trade-off considerations, right? So we now have 18 instead of 20 rooms. That 900 square foot per room accommodates a specific maximum of children. So we can back that into what the size of the grade or the school is. Is that really, I'm just trying to see if I'm following this.
You're working it backwards. You're trying to make
Yeah.
the numbers work by taking up more square footage to accommodate lesser classrooms, but they'll be compliant.
Yeah.
Right.
And the issue there is the walls in between the classrooms, they're all very structural in nature.
Okay.
The original 1936 wing is a very robust building. It's got mosaics on the walls, and the walls are mostly all bearing with gypcrete planks, so it would be an undertaking structurally, because you'd have to go from the bottom up as you start renovating and load bearing everything together.
And the only other aspect too is with that is having more smaller classrooms affords you a little more flexibility in terms of scheduling and arrangement of configuration of teams. And so as you start to get larger ones, the ability to sort of divide the grade level at this number or this becomes more problematic just because you have fewer containers.
But help me out here, though, I'm a little confused, because if I understood from the previous conversation, if you renovate, then plumbing codes, building codes, state education codes all come into play and impact ultimately the design and the number of students that could be supported by the building. If we don't renovate, then we have what we have, and we struggle through what we have. Just once you open the door to renovation, the regulations really are gonna drive whatever reconfiguration you want.
That's correct.
So, but how much smaller can that classroom be? The regulation is still gonna say
Right, because you
900
still
or
gotta-
850 or whatever.
Because if you reduce the square footage, you get less students. We did a calculation, right now you get about 108 pupils in there. If we go to the calculation of the capacity, which is tab 5, we worked it out that with utilization, which is what they use 90%, this facility without the modules can hold 823 students. So already you've got a deficit of allowable students in general classroom teaching spaces, which hence why you have the modules. The modules are there, and that kind of validates the fact that you have them there because you ran out of room.
But with declining enrollments, I mean, it's hard to predict what's gonna happen, right?
Yep, they've been declining.
But we
we
still
are
have
where
like
we are.
1,100 kids there, we're nowhere near reaching
Okay.
3.
And you get into, so Fairgrounds in Pennachuck probably had more available capacity, right? So you get into a game of how do you move people around, redistrict certain streets, that kind of thing, right, to make it work. But that's always a funny game, because you think you're making progress, and then a bunch of people move onto a street, and it's in the wrong neighborhood, and you're back at it again. All right.
So moving from part B of the ground floor up to the first floor, and that's, you can see in the green area, that's the administration area. And again, similar issue with the split level entrances at Mount Pleasant, that it's remote from the secured entrance into the building. And so this one has a fair number of administrative spaces, and I think, and there's some shared conferencing, but there's still a desire for additional conference and meeting space. There's one sort of historic conference room 101, but again, that accommodates a certain size, but smaller group meetings, there's a lack of space for those. Right now, currently, there's a music program over in yellow identified in the adjacent to classrooms, and so there's a challenge with having sound that disturbs the adjacent areas. As Dan mentioned, the library mezzanine, there are supervision issues by having it up above. You almost have to have some mechanism to sort of keep an eye on things at that level. And then again, we see the arrangement of classrooms that we talked about before, the general classrooms and the size of them.
On a positive note, guidance was pretty happy with their spaces. They've got a few minor things, but they're very happy where they are. They're nicely organized.
And then moving up to the third classroom level, again, similar story, and again, you can see the double loaded corridors in each of the areas, but again, it's the primary issues are the arrangement of teaming, or the lack of common team space, and the size of the classrooms.
This T area is 1936, so it's all very vintage. A lot of the old millwork or basically wardrobe areas and such have been removed and filled up with shelving. So there's a lot of older millwork that has been reminiscent, and even some of the science labs are renovated science cabinets. They're not ADA accessible. Storage is a real issue. You see that on the upper floor.
And the next level. Yep. So the third floor is the science floor, and while there's the larger rooms. A standard science lab gets closer to the 1,100 to 1,200 square feet. And so these are less than that. They, again, and a lot of, as Dan suggested, a lot of the infrastructure and systems in those is still very dated. And in some respects, again, there's sort of every time I do a school design, it's always a question of, do you disperse science departments into a teaming structure, or do you locate them for utility reasons together? These ones are sort of, again, a departmental structure where they're all together, instead of sort of a middle school model where you would actually distribute science rooms into the teams.
In the teams, which is very common in middle school, that's part of the team, so they can interact with the other classrooms.
You say these are recommended 11 to 1,200 square feet?
If you do them as labs/classrooms, they're 1440.
Or even more if you're doing instruction in the space, yeah.
And a lot of them are set up as a dual classroom lab.
Isn't there, maybe you said, in addition to the 1440, I know there's like a storage area where you have to put equipment, so it's 1440.
Plus the storage areas,
So
especially
it's
with
like-
chemistry and physics and prep areas. So there's additional support spaces that go along with that. And they usually, if you put them as they usually back to back. If you do them as a team, then there would be a mini version of that. But storage is very important, especially with chemistry, ventilation, things of that nature.
Mr. Cobb?
Thank you. Dr. Mosley, let me ask you a question. The middle school teaching model, we currently have this team concept, English. In other words, 3 or 4 subjects, the kids rotate amongst a group of however many teachers are in that team, and they kind of, kids see the same teachers each day. And they're pretty much located, at least Pennachuck, each grade has its own corridor for the most part, unless they roam to gym or whatever. So is that, because it impacts the notion of a team versus having science in this corner and English over here and math over here. So I'm just really curious in terms of how would you set up a school? Would you keep the team concept and design for that? Or is it more like a high school model where different departments or wherever they are and the kids go to it?
So the middle school model is of the team approach, and that's what we currently have in structure. And so the design of that kind of it varies. So for instance, what I've seen in other building projects in Massachusetts is like the first floor, there's a team there, right? So when I worked in Middleborough, if you can picture this, there's 3 levels, right? In each level the bottom level was 6th grade, the middle level was 7th grade, and the upper level was the 8th grade.
Yes.
So all of the science classrooms were aligned. Am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
like, all of the science classrooms were, so there's 3 teams on each level?
Right, they were stacked.
They were stacked.
Yeah.
Right, so they were all kind of aligned, and there was 3 6th grade teams with each of the teams with a science lab or space dedicated on top of that. If you can imagine, they kind of parallel each other. So that's how we did it in Middleborough. And then in they shared what's called like a common area where all the lockers would be, and all they would do like team meetings. And if you can picture this, there would be like a whiteboard there. And so all of the classrooms would filter out into this common area for the team to do like what I call team building.
Fairgrounds each has a wing and then there's a common area where the lockers are. So
This is a challenge here. This
this
is
is
a
vertical,
little
not-
different.
yeah.
This is a very large building with,
And it's in a building not really designed, it was designed for high school.
That's just to say, it's designed for high school.
in high school is a little different, because high school, there's no real team, there's more like departments. So in a sense, you want to travel to that department. So, and even when you have a high school, there's different variations of a science lab. So a chemistry lab, am I making sense?
Yes.
Is a little different than a physics lab.
Exactly.
A physics lab, we would do, the ceiling heights were different, so I'm not a, you know, so.
Right on
But you're right,
target.
yeah,
Am I right on point here?
exactly.
You're right on point.
Absolutely.
So it's like 15 feet for a regular science lab, but for physics lab, it would be like 20, but then they have like a bar running through it, so you could actually use it for instructional pieces.
Yeah, and part of, a lot of it is thinking about the socialization and aspect of moving to larger schools, and how do you create smaller communities within the school so that students, again, have an easier time adapting to that and socializing in smaller, and so that's part of the idea behind the teaming concept. And that even plays into at the high school level when we're designing larger high schools, is to try to create schools within the schools or smaller communities, learning communities within a larger environment.
So what tab is the good news?
So I think that is in Mr. Dubois' department in terms of the good news.
Never has been before.
Right.
Wow. Thanks, Mark.
That's a,
Do you want to talk about the construction deficiencies, or do you?
We did, we can talk in general terms, again, a little bit about some of the facility deficiencies. To take the sort of easier one, and first in terms of smaller in terms of its scale, but so Mount Pleasant, again, a very solid historic core to the building that has had its additions in 1987. At the time that they did the additions, they actually brought several building systems up to the standard at that time. Well, it's been 30 years since 1987. It feels like it hasn't been 30 years, but it has.
No, it feels like it.
And building systems are, the average span of a building system is anywhere from 20 years to about 40 maximum. The exceptions being structure, the structural systems of the buildings oftentimes will extend past 40 years. So for instance, compact fluorescent lighting that was state-of-the-art in 1987 when it was installed is now obsolete with sort of the energy consumption and also the easier maintenance of LED lighting, which is ubiquitous now in building construction. And at the time, again, of 87, they did several things to upgrade lighting, finishes throughout the building, but there are still, in many ways, it still has a lot of its old systems. Recently, the district's been addressing some of the climate issues by installing, particularly on the third floor, and I don't know if we've gone any further than that yet, Sean, or not, second floor now too, yeah. With adding heat pumps that can heat and cool the space. The additions in '87 were very solid, and so those are in good shape. From an exterior envelope, there wasn't a lot of insulation added to the exterior envelope, so it's still the original masonry structure to the building that was done in 1925. The windows are actually throughout the building are large, as was typical with these with older buildings with much larger openings, which all the staff have said are wonderful amenities to have, all that nice natural light coming in, but the windows really haven't held up in terms of the durability for those. The boilers, again, are an aspect of, there's been work done to them, but the idea of upgrading the entire heating system with pumps and piping, and then going with more efficient gas-fired condensing boilers like we've done in some of the more recent renovations, allows you to produce energy far more efficiently than what you're doing right now, and installing state-of-the-art control system to actually increase the efficiency of those. The district has kept up fairly well with installing technology in the spaces, and so there's Wi-Fi throughout the building. There are the number of outlets and data, hard data jack locations in each of the classrooms is much lower than what we would like to have, and so there are examples of extension cords or power strips throughout the building. And again, in general, the electrical system is, a lot of it is in fairly decent shape. The lighting was upgraded to what we call T8s. That was sort of the cutting edge technology in '87. But again, nowadays that's sort of outdated. And the fire alarm system itself is recommended to be replaced. New systems are addressable, and getting parts for older systems becomes really problematic. I don't know if Gary's been able to continue to keep up with that, but as part of a renovation, the recommendation is that to replace the fire alarm system itself. Dan, anything else that?
Yeah, also security is a big issue,
big issue.
cameras, CCTVs, the technology also with, they've gone from smart boards now to projectors that are interactive, so that's always progressing. In fact, between Broad Street and Sunset, we saw a slightly different method of producing information from smart boards to shot throw projectors. So that's always something that this building will have when its day comes to renovate.
Right.
You're going to be upgrading that pretty quickly.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. You mentioned technology and hardwired drops. With the advent of wireless the way it is now, how much do you have? Are there
Right.
state mandates around hardwired drops, or will they let you do a wireless network?
So most technology directors are still using both in facilities, and so they're whether it's reliability of the hard connection, that sometimes there's interference and coverage issues with wireless, and so that's oftentimes in some instances there's concern over confidentiality that a wireless signal can be received, but for the most part, most of them are using a combination, and a lot of it has to do with capacity, the bandwidth. You can get much faster with the hard connections.
A lot of schools are getting more comfortable having less drops.
Yeah, more reliance on Wi-Fi,
More reliance
because
on
standards have
Wi-Fi.
improved.
You're
and-
going to see the move to the phone or a tablet or some wireless computer connection.
Right.
I mean, it's just the way.
Right.
What they're doing for us or to us, I'm not really sure which.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you want to talk cost at this point and keep rolling, then we can talk about Elm Street, or do you want to finish both?
Sorry, talk about cost for Mount Pleasant?
I mean, excuse me, Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, that's
What's
fine.
in front of you, back in 2016, we took a look at this, and our estimate was $9.3 million. We're looking at about overall, I think it's a 16-month construction process to get through the school. To
Sorry, are we looking at this sheet right now?
No,
or-
you're looking at the one I handed out, it should be this one here.
We didn't get that.
No, I
Oh,
haven't.
They're all in front of Mark, I'm
Because they're
sorry.
sitting right here.
Again, Howard, they're right by you. That's all I'm
Howard,
saying.
you can blame
I'll
me.
pass on Elm Street.
Hey, I'm in the hot seat tonight, that's all I can say.
Moving on to everything.
What's our current enrollment?
I'll make you one copy.
It's like 340 enrollment at Mount Pleasant.
Okay.
Dr. Mosley.
I mean, Elm Street.
It's.
Yeah, it's
It's like 360, I say 3.
Yeah.
It's around 3.5.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when we looked at it this year, some of the major differences in cost, because this year we're at 10.45 million. The major differences are
We're looking at the skinny one?
the skinny one, yeah, the skinny one with the smaller number.
I just
And
wanna
the
be clear,
really
the-
small print?
Sorry.
The number you're talking about is hard
It's construction
costs.
only. In any construction project, there's two pieces. This is what's called hard cost. This is the nuts and bolts. There's a other part of a construction project called soft cost. And what the soft cost is would be these gentlemen's fee, their consultants' fees, what we call FF&E, which is furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. So there's two parts that make up a overall construction budget. What you're looking at here is strictly the hard costs. What I say is.
Soft costs were on that sheet that I handed out earlier.
Right, no, I know.
But
Just
what
wanna
we're
make sure.
talking about, what I'm presenting is the hard cost that's in front of you. So we're looking at about a 16-month construction process. In the numbers, this school has probably the smallest gymnasium I've seen in the district. We're going to try to convert that to a couple rooms, and we've carried 3 portable classrooms in the back of the school on the asphalt. for a 16-month duration. That cost alone, connected, plumbing, fire alarm, everything has to go in, is about $370,000. So it's $370,000 worth of cost that is just temporary, gonna go away.
I think I remember asking this question before, but let's say some miracle happened and we had swing space for Mount Pleasant students for an entire year that allowed you to just
You could
go
do it
end to end. What does that, any idea what that saves?
The primary saving there would be in what we call general condition costs. That would be our cost. And you're probably looking, I don't know if I got it broken out on a monthly basis. Yeah, about $45,000 a month. So you'd save
370
6 months plus
that.
the three, you'd save the temporary classrooms. And you'd save approximately 6 months, another 45 at 6, 24, 270, you know, so it's approaching in excess of $500,000.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I don't know what that swing space would be, but just imagining if you had it and you could somehow do it for less than the 500,000, right? You save some portion.
Absolutely. The cost of the work would still be there.
Right.
Okay, it's the duration of time that we'd be on site and the temporary classrooms that you would have to build. In this number, as we've done in the past on all the other schools, there's two contingencies that I've carried. I have we've been carrying $200,000 on the elementary schools that we've done for a construction contingency. I've carried $300,000 on this one, based on the structure and the complexity. There's little over $600,000 what I call design contingency. There hasn't been an ounce of engineering done yet. There's really been no exploratory work. We're pricing this based on the relationship of what we've been doing for you and what we see. Again, till you get into the engineering and start getting some engineered documents, there's that level of complexity that I'm not sure that this totally reflects it. So you carry a contingency to cover that. So what I'm looking at is trying to lock in at the high note and try to work it down from there based on a design contingency. As the documents would be complete, that design contingency would either get rolled into additional scope that wasn't covered here or would ultimately be reduced. And then lastly, not knowing when these projects would go, at best they're a year out based on design and approvals and what you have to do. On Mount Pleasant, there's about $800,000 of escalation. From the second quarter of last year to the second quarter of this year was 5% on the 5% escalation. It's been recognized by the industry. We are still waiting to see what the impact has been on the 2 hurricanes that have gone through and the surtax on forestry products coming out of Canada. We haven't seen anything yet. You've seen gas prices rise. Things are going to start to pick up in cost. So I don't have a crystal ball, but we've got you covered for probably 2 years is my best guess on what we think based on $800,000+ in escalation. What will you think?
So here's a harder question. If I'm looking at Mount Pleasant, what's the most, I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but what's the most critical failure point for us? So let's say we can't do these projects for a number of years, right? What's the thing that's going to, is there something that's going to break and be sort of a crisis for us, like whether it be
The boilers?
or you know, what are the things, or the roof, or the
roof is about as solid as they come. We did some tests there, and it's pretty thick.
yeah, and I mean, the
Various
core of the
layers.
building is solid.
The structure is solid. The boilers are actually in decent shape. We've replaced individual components such as the water heaters, things like that. So there is no
Immediate tire.
Right.
immediate dire
Yep.
need anywhere.
Yep. It's,
You could go several years easy. Just the wear and tear, the building's getting tired.
yep.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Continued
I mean,
aging of
structurally, it's sound. I mean, the building is sound. I mean, kudos to the buildings that were built back in the 20, 1925 through 35, the WPA projects, they're solid as a rock.
But no insulation, very large windows, we're just
Exactly.
pushing
They're-
utility
they're
costs right up
energy,
there.
energy,
Inefficient.
they're gonna drive energy costs up through the roof right now, based on the lack of insulation,
Yeah.
the amount of fenestration that you have in the building, the large openings. In this number, one of the differences in the cost between last year and this year, as these gentlemen have looked at the building a little closer and realizing we gotta do something to build up the R value within the building, we are stripping the exterior walls back to the brick, furring it out and insulating the exterior walls. The fenestration openings stay the same size, they'll be replaced with more efficient windows, but you're gonna get an increase in R value in the building, and you'll have a new roof. And I think what you folks have seen, based on what we've done in the last 5 buildings, is the energy cost has been driven down dramatically in all these schools, so.
Right. Mr. Coffey?
As a follow-up to that, I mean, what about drapes at the end of the day? In the winter, can they just do drapes to help cut some air loss? I understand we're not replacing the windows.
Right. So those will have a minimal, they potentially would help a little bit with trying to baffle a little bit of infiltration of air, but most of the heat is still going to get in through gaps in those, and as well as heat loss just through the glass itself. And so there may be a minor, I don't know that it'd be that appreciable.
Not worth the investment?
It's inevitably what we see with almost all window treatments is it comes down to where the operators are using them the way they're intended. So is there someone that's going around and closing drapes at certain times of the day? And then inevitably also the mechanisms for, particularly as you're looking at large openings, sometimes those can get problematic and more prone to fail over time. So.
In the prior schools that we have renovated, there has been actually minimum amount on exterior insulation. We had new roofs, but minimum amount. But the savings have come from going from fluorescents to LEDs. Your boiler systems and your pumps and all of that is so more efficient today than they were even 20 years ago. You're picking up the efficiency on that. And
We did a lot of sealing.
we sealed everything, we tightened everything, right? Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. But the primary difference in number last year to this year has been redoing that whole exterior wall, and it's not just drywall insulation, it's millwork, it's window trim, it's everything else that goes with it. That's now included in that. And I think we've expanded on the site work from 2016 with the introduction of the bus loop. And on top of that, in the back, we're also repaving everything. We are fixing up the with under drains and new drainage systems, new timber walls around the playground equipment areas and that type of stuff. We're fixing both exterior stairways that need to be corrected before somebody gets hurt. All that is now in the number that wasn't in the number a year ago, so that's why you're seeing the increase that you saw. But all told, I mean, you're looking at 16-month construction. The rest of this estimate falls into what you have been seeing. So it's baseboard replacement, casework, ceilings, lights, paint, door hardware corrections, Eno boards, that type of thing. So everything that we have done in the last couple of projects is incorporated in here. But it does not address any of the programmatic problems that Mark alluded to earlier in terms of undersized classrooms and that type of thing, or the lack of, we are correcting bathrooms, but you're losing fixtures rather than gaining fixtures. You're gonna make them ADA compliant, but by doing that, you're gonna lose a stall in the gang restrooms. So while you're bringing it up to ADA requirements, the bathrooms, the stair handrails are all non-compliant today. We're fixing all of those. All of that will be corrected. The fenestration's all gonna be changed. All the windows are gonna be changed out. It's got a new roof. Kitchen would get a new hood.
Exhaust.
New exhaust.
A little more space.
A little bit,
There's
no,
no room.
not really, there's no room, I mean,
They're gonna be
you're
stuck
pretty
with
much locked in.
375 square feet?
You're pretty much locked in.
Mr.
So,
Farrington, did you have your hand up?
No, that's fine.
no, that's fine. So,
So can I, so I guess, just to step back here, you look at this school, it's among the smallest schools in terms of number of pupils.
right.
You look at the trend, and then the reason I'm asking the question about what's the breakage point is, you know, if you go, I mean, realistically, it's not a year, it's probably 2 or 3, and that depends on whether we decide we're gonna do Elm Street before we do Mount Pleasant. You know, you could be looking at 4 or 5 years before you get to Mount Pleasant. Well, now, instead of 356 students, are you down to 270, and could you move those 270 some, you know, I mean, so, given the expense per square foot, I think, you know, we really need to look at this one in particular. I mean, so I think the middle school is more problematic because you're not gonna get rid of a middle school, right? You've gotta somehow have something. But whereas the elementary school, either you could start to think about, can I add capacity at a lower cost at a different school, right? And then take this one out of the mix, you know, and I know everyone get their up in arms, but I'm not up for reelection, so I'll just say it.
Neither would I.
You know, I mean, so I just, this is the one where I look at it and I just go, I don't know how we may pull the trigger on this kind of investment, given our population and where we're going, but, you know, but we need the numbers, so it's good to have them.
It's not only population. This particular school is surrounded, it's a block. It's surrounded by 4 streets. It's also in a historical district. So you've got other constraints that you're gonna be dealing with that you haven't had to face in the past.
We've never had any trouble with the Historic Commission before. Oh, wait a minute, yep, I think we have. Mr. Kaufman.
I want to thank Mr. Hollowell for saying and being realistic and practical about
I've been saying
reality.
it for months, yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's been said before, and I remember one of the aldermen asked us at one time to consider maybe shutting down a building at some point if that were feasible. So I agree that it should be on the table and that I won't be up for reelection at that time either, but we'll do the hard part now and at least have the discussion. May I ask a question
Sure, go
about,
right ahead.
on page 5 where you have estimate totals, and you actually have a cost per square foot. So, may I ask, is it the bottom line number that it's 209?
That's the bottom line number on the 10.5 million.
Okay, so for the Mount Pleasant School, the current estimate is just over $209 per square foot. I just want-
Hard construction costs.
And, yes,
Not
so,
counting soft costs.
Soft costs is the other sheet.
okay, so for the folks at home and for me to restate it so it starts sinking into my brain, because I need repetition, so it's the $209.15 per square foot plus, and then we go back to the sheet from Mr. Smith, and you don't have it on there, do you know what it is?
It's about 4 million. All the other soft costs, because it's 14.4 versus 10.
Okay, 4 million. So an additional,
50,000 square feet, right? Sorry.
Yeah, so 260 square feet or so, 260 per square foot.
260 for the soft cost.
Well, in total.
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 Oh,
It's
260.
It's 209, 210 now to be about 260.
You are quickly approaching the cost of a new school
Yeah,
without
the benefit.
the cost of land or having the ability to land. Yeah.
So if I may, when you say approaches, are you around 275 or 300?
You could be anywhere from plus $250 to $300, plus $300 a square foot.
Okay,
With-
so
with full
250 to
site- With
300.
full site development, with fields, you know, playgrounds, that type of thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on Mount Pleasant? All right, let's do on.
Yep, we'll move our attention to Elm Street and the facility analysis. And again, this had well,
And I think we can go pretty broad here. I mean, we've
Okay,
already
very
had a
good.
presentation
Solid-
on this.
solid
with
building.
what they recommended, right, so.
very good. Solid building, original 1936, the additions in 61 and 91 much less so. A similar scope in terms of renovations that have been identified. The big difference here is that there's been a more extensive renovation proposed to address the portable classroom structures, as well as a new entrance and some additional spaces for a replacement of the cafeteria and some additional spaces in and around the auditorium. Any questions? How's that? Is that quicker?
That's fine with me. I think we know there's a lot of work. I guess the only thing I'd like an update on, when Carl goes over the hard costs, whether we do or don't know any more about the undulating floors that we're worried about. So I guess if you can speak to that when you talk about the costs.
Yeah, so we can.
I mean, unless anybody has
Yeah,
any questions
there's-
about, we already went through that one.
Yeah, we did.
pretty heavily, so.
Well, you have the second estimate in front of you.
The thicker one.
This one, we're looking, we've currently tagged it, I hate to say it's 4 years, I've never had a project last 4 years, but to try to get through this in an occupied school with very little swing space. What we're looking to do to create the swing space is to take the large gymnasium and create 16 classrooms, and that's much larger than we've done in any other facility. And again, the delta here, the biggest difference here versus what we've been doing, we've been renovating horizontally, one wing at a time. Here, everything comes vertically because of the nature of the ductwork and everything that has to flow on a vertical nature. So we sat down internally, we looked at it. At this point, it may be less than that, but at this point, we're saying comfortably, we know you can get it done in that duration. Once again, this one has contingencies of $1 million for construction, based on a size of 217,000. It has a design contingency of 3.1 million, and it has escalation of 3.6. So you've got 7.6 million just in contingencies, because we're so early in the process. All right. So there's some latitude there, potentially. To speak to the floor issue, no, Mr. Elwell, there hasn't been any further investigation. What the investigation that was done was, and the problem, just for the folks at home, is right now, the way that school was built, the floors are covered, and the floors are covered underneath, above the acoustical ceiling with plaster. At the time, my concern was going in there to already make holes, and whether we're dealing with asbestos. So Mr. Smith authorized the boys from Harriman, we hired RPF to go out, do the investigative work, and we came back, found it was negative.
Negative.
Yeah, which is good.
A variety of ceiling conditions.
So if you decide to go forward, then we can open it up without having to abate it first. That has not been done. And the concern, and for the folks at home, there has been issues in this school that facilities have had to correct some deficiencies in the floor already. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sean.
Correct.
Okay, so there has been signs that there is trouble, and the reason being is this is a gyp plank floor, correct? So it's just gypsum interlocked. There's no concrete, structural concrete or cast-in-place concrete flooring system. So as you make penetrations over the years, if you put them in the wrong location, you're compromising the structural integrity of the deck. That could be sizable to try to replace, because the thickness of that system, and we spoke with the structural engineers at Harriman, to try to match that thickness is going to be problematic. And if you don't match it, now all your doors aren't at the proper height. And there's some beautiful ceramic tile wainscoting that's in excellent shape in that school. So it would blossom into something bigger than just the structural aspect of replacing the floor in kind. And if you take the floor aspect, if you're taking it out in sections, then I have concerns on what are we gonna do to keep that building together laterally while the floor is being removed. So it gets very convoluted. And there's really a lot of engineering that has to go on to truly evaluate what that impact would be, if there is one. There may not be. I mean, maybe those areas that have been replaced are, is it? I don't know. I can't tell you. Just by walking the floors, you can't see it. And looking underneath, we put many ceiling tile and you can't see anything. So the plaster would have to come down, and then somebody would have to go in and do an evaluation on what's left for structural integrity of the floor.
Has anybody ever worked on those floors before?
Just
We have,
facilities.
probably once or twice a year, maybe less now. You'll see a dimple in the floor tile. It's a telltale sign that the floor plank underneath is failing. So we take out, we pull everything out, take it all out, and we usually replace it with good thick plywood. That gets us past it.
I seem to have a recollection of the last time the project was done, they went into that section and did some flooring work.
In the early 2000s, we got money, and I think we totally replaced maybe 4 or 5 classrooms in one of the wings. I want to say the T up on the 3rd floor.
The other major cost in this project, based on the additions that are being proposed and where the additions are located, I don't know if we can speak to that. Do you have it here? Yeah. Mr. Farrington, you're talking about taking down and demolishing the existing cafeteria, existing kitchen, and putting up a 4-story addition in the back with the ultimate goal of getting rid of the portable classrooms in the future. To do that, school's got to remain in session. So in my numbers, I have a portable kitchen we're bringing in, trailer connected to the small gym for 1 year. To get that addition built, we would relocate the kids from the cafeteria, they would eat in the small gym, and an outside kitchen would be brought in to prepare the food and bring it in. You wouldn't have the same dining choices probably that you have today. It would be limited, but we've done this at another school.
MREs?
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. So that's in there, and that value, I had it here. Bear with me. I'd have to add it up. It's in here. I thought I added it up while I was waiting to speak. The other thing that's in here is the renovation of the auditorium and the auditorium addition. Inside the auditorium, there's about over $250,000 of reupholstering seats and not upgrading seats, but just reupholstering was there. And there's a total of about $300,000 allowance for rigging and curtains and that type of thing. Honestly, in an auditorium, that could go from $300,000 to $1 million, depending on sound systems and lighting systems and sound control, okay, from an acoustic standpoint. What we've done for you, unfortunately, our system doesn't put a total on each one, but if you go to the 3rd page, we've pulled out, and you can do the math, but we pulled out what the site cost would be, what the building renovations would be, what the administration, cafeteria, kitchen, classroom renovation would cost, what the auditorium would cost, so you could add those up. Those are hard costs without what I call the add-ons, without contingency, without bond, that type of thing. But it'll give you an approximation of what those additions are going for, if you wanted to try to understand what that cost would be.
So can I ask, so in the sheet
No,
that
because some of that is
Mr. Smith handed out,
I'm sorry?
in the sheet that Mr. Smith handed out, this one that says page 4 for some
Yep.
reason. So the Mount Pleasant hard construction costs were about exactly what you said. In his hard construction costs for Elm Street, it says 49,323, and yours is
I'm
48.
48,507. We have met since then and talked about a few things, so. One of the things
Well, I was
we
gonna ask,
pulled
so-
out, in the 49, that was our shot at what we thought the replacement would be. We have since reduced that to just minor patching of the floor element itself.
Okay. All right, but you also have a $1.1 million alternate for,
Variable refrigeration, if you wanted to do cooling in the 36 and 61
okay,
buildings.
which is not.
That's
in
an
this-
add, that's a total add to what it would be. Yep.
So do I understand correctly, the school would go 4 years without a gymnasium and no athletic
No,
fields?
you would go, the way I see it, you'd go a year without it, because I think what
Oh,
would
okay.
happen, you'll get the small gymnasium back when the addition's done,
Okay,
and the kids return to the cafeteria, the brand-new cafeteria.
yeah.
That would go back to being a small gymnasium.
So they'd go one full year without any gymnasium,
Correct.
no athletic fields.
Correct. And it, again, it's,
Fortunately, have those outside fields they can use. Oh,
Main Street?
instead of-
Front lawn, come on,
Yeah,
plenty of room up there.
remove those statues.
so yes, you would have
The
to,
trees, yeah.
phys ed would be limited for 1 year out of it, and you get it back.
Mr. Kaufman?
So, not to preempt Mr. Hollowell, but to maybe steal the question he was thinking about asking, similar to Mount Pleasant, how much life is left in this building? The same idea in terms of, we don't know when we'll get to it and all those kinds of things.
You do have, in this building, there's more deterioration, I can tell you, in steel lintels are showing signs of rusting and wear. You have some cracks in the exterior facade. Windows,
Cafeteria.
cafeteria,
structures,
in the back, the sawtooth and the cast-in-place roofs are showing signs of spalling, and you have exposed rebar that's rusting. So it's a little more of an issue.
advanced.
Right.
I'm not saying it's an immediate failure for the people at home, I wouldn't say that. You do have signs of deterioration in this building, much more prevalent than you do at Mount Pleasant.
It's also steam heat and pneumatic controls, which make it very difficult to control the environment in the classrooms. Seems like every other year or so we're jackhammering through the floor to get to the steam lines because they've ruptured, and we have to take care of that.
That's
You
good.
drive by the
That
school in
helps.
January with the windows open.
Helps the structural integrity of the flooring, I
But it's
guess.
the concrete floor is the good news, not the,
So, yeah, that's in
So-
the basement. But the other aspect, I guess, is the age of the portable classrooms. We've been pouring money into them maintenance-wise to keep them up and running. Probably have to replace all the roofing the next year or two. Those are also getting tired. But nothing's dramatic. You can make it another year easy.
Yeah. So on this one, again, if I go to the bottom line per square foot, right, so I get to a number that seems almost equivalent to, if I add in the soft construction costs, right, I'm up around $260 a square foot. And for a middle school, is that on par with the brand new?
Yep. Honestly, yes. And again, keep in mind, the folks at home, this $7 million of contingencies. The million probably won't disappear, but you're gonna use some portion thereof of the 3.1 design and the 3.6 design by the time, and escalation by the time you would get this to the street and actually start construction based on where you are today.
Plus the unknown of the floors,
And we still have the issue, we may have an issue with the floor.
possibly plus.
You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't.
Mr. Kaufman?
so again, I appreciate the question and comparing it to the new construction. So in an ideal world, you can paint a really cool picture which gives the school district, our students, the best possible outcome. I'm hearing, or at least maybe I'm hearing my own talk in my own head, is, gee, it would be really cool if we had some land somewhere where we could build a new building.
We do.
Okay, that's halfway here, thank you, I appreciate that. And that we
But
could,
it's for the elementary, it's only
An elementary
elementary
school.
school.
I was gonna say,
I'm
be
talking,
careful.
I'm middle, my thought is middle. So,
I'm not sure.
so I'm just saying an ideal painting a picture, not reality. I know we're far from reality. So we had land, the city made available to us, we could build something that's state-of-the-art school for similar money, give or take. And then we'd be left with Elm Street to figure out what to do with.
Elm Street replacement in land would probably, you would need about 15 acres with fields and playground. Usable, usable acres.
Buildable.
Buildable
Buildable?
acres. Not 15 acres and
How
5.
many acres were there at Daniel Webster College again?
53, I believe the number was.
Any more than 15.
Yeah, but see, the buildings that were the problem.
Well, they had
Right.
that, what, there was 10 in the, where the woods are.
Yes.
All right. I didn't hear any good news in anything you reported here.
Sorry. Don't shoot the messenger.
So can I ask one question? We talk about, if we were to rebuild, we did Broad Street, we did Sunset. Now, we just did those, we didn't even consider rebuilding because there were a lot of fewer issues, but if you're gonna, we spent, what, 11 million on Sunset when we're all said and done? If we rebuilt that, what was that gonna be, 20 million? So it was a much better idea to do that, or
Was
was,
60,000 feet?
Yep, 65.
What, 260, 270? You got it, get your calculator going? I thought that's what you were doing, Mike.
Yeah. So we had 60,000 square feet times, let's say 260 is 15.6 million. That's hard time, well, no,
That's
that's
construction.
260, that's total. We did 260, so.
No, that's construction. Not,
Oh, 260 is
That's hard.
only,
Yeah.
that's hard cost. You
Alright.
gotta add
20.
soft costs to that. You're about $1 million.
yeah.
But with Sunset, you've got a lot more flexibility, right? I mean, it's like you said, you've got, Mount Pleasant is in this constrained box, right? And you can't, it's hard to move things within the school, right, to make more room, and because you've got the solid walls, right? So there's just all kinds of impediments to that school. I'm not saying it's not a beautiful building. It is, well constructed.
Oh,
It's just,
absolutely. Got a lot of character.
Is there limitations on the FF&E, for instance, some of the building projects that I've been involved in? Like if some of the furniture is not up to code in terms of fire code, you can't move it into a new building? And particularly what I'm referencing is like bean bags we ran into, with bean bags and fire codes. Is that still?
Very, very much the case, and again, it's oftentimes outside the purview of the same people that we are using for permitting the building, because we don't, it's not the contractor putting in that, but absolutely, there are flame characteristics and smoke characteristics of all of the finishes that are required to meet them.
So when you talk about soft costs, that would be included in the FF&E?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks a lot, guys.
I wish I had better news.
So do I.
Well, yeah, I mean, so just for the public's, I mean, we know these projects because we've just finished, our fourth renovation up in elementary school. This is not gonna move forward in the next 12 months at the very least, and probably it's 2 or 3 years before we have to make this. So the idea is to get the information we need to make the decision, right, when we finally have to pull the trigger. I again, I'll get on my soapbox again, which is, I think there are opportunities the city should continue to look at if there's land or properties that become available that would make us either have the ability to do some kind of swing space to make some of these things happen temporarily, or to actually think about, moving these facilities. I still look at Elm Street, look at its location, look at the fact that auditorium is, it's oversized for an elementary school, for a middle school, right? So we're paying for a larger auditorium for the school, not something you'd necessarily build to a school you were going to replace it with. It has multiple uses, that building might be able to be repurposed for other things at a cheaper cost, which might allow us to buy property that would make it so that we could build a middle school somewhere else.
I mean, thinking outside the box, you might, and I'd let Dan and Mark weigh in on this, is, there's a fair amount of real estate in front of Mount Pleasant. Is it possible to create a larger addition and take more of the existing down later on? It would still be vertical. It wouldn't, but
Yeah,
you're
the
not
challenge I
solving,
see
you're
there
not
is
solving the
whatever-
issues of playfields.
Right, exactly. That's what I've always struggled with that middle
Parking,
school is,
playfields,
there's no
bus
parking, there's no play fields, it's got this dual use kind of thing going on.
Mhm.
We pay for transportation.
What's that?
We're paying for transportation when we transport kids
Yep,
Yeah.
for athletics.
for athletics.
Yeah,
They don't really have a home game, they have to transport.
right. So, I just think we need to keep this in the air so people keep thinking about alternatives, right? you know, Daniel Webster College might not have been the right answer, but we need the city, we need the school district and the city to be thinking about that possibility, because this is a very big number. We have other schools that could use renovations. You know, we've got the open concept classrooms at Maine Dunstable and Birch Hill. You know, both of those would love to have a renovation, and, you know, do you start to think about, do you leapfrog over these because there's, you know, there's some alternative that'll have to come up at some point, but anyway, said enough. Anybody else have any other questions? Mr. Grang?
Just off the top of your head, what's the optimum size for an elementary school?
In terms of,
Capacity.
yeah, students?
160?
What's that?
160 square feet per student?
Oh,
No, but I mean,
you're talking
saying
population.
student
population.
So
population.
there are rules of thumb that say that 300 to 400 is sort of a community size, and so what we're seeing a lot of our elementary schools around the 500 to 600 square foot in terms of that's sort of a reasonable number that students that students feel a sense of community in, and again it's community specific. We're right now doing an elementary school that's at about 900 students, but that's a lot on the large side.
500 to 600?
500 to 600 is an average size that, again, is pretty comfortable, and it has more efficiencies than you have with the 300 to 400.
The economy of scale, but at some
Absolutely.
point you bump up against the other side of that where you don't have time for specialists and those
Correct.
sorts of things.
Yep, exactly. And the
Okay.
school itself starts to become a very large, and even getting from one side of a building to
Yeah.
another is.
And on a square footage basis?
So 130 to 150 are ranges that we see in the design of elementary schools.
Mr. Donovan?
And have you worked with more K to 2 type, 3 to 5, or are people?
So one of the aspects of trying to create, again, schools that are more manageable in size, and what we're seeing now are actually a lot of pre-K through, and somewhere around second grade, and then 3 through 5 is oftentimes a break. Otherwise, it's pre-K through 5, and then 6 through 8 in the middle school model. That's pretty common. Sometimes that intermediate school, there are some communities where, again, if the school gets large enough, they'll always create an intermediate school at that 3 to 5 grade range.
One last, if I may, just the same information relative to a middle school. So in terms of square foot,
Yeah, and I believe actually their New Hampshire Department of Ed has some ranges, recommended ranges, but they bump up, and you're probably looking at, for middle schools, they jump up from, I don't know if they segregate it differently or
It's
not,
like
but
140 is the low end.
yeah, and probably up to around 160 to in that range, 130, 140 to 160. And then high schools jump up a much larger range, and we see those around 200 to above.
and then the follow-on question is, in terms of the number of students of Mr. Donovan, you said we have about 1,100 kids at that particular school now?
Yes.
So is that common size?
It's
for
more
middle
common
schools?
as you get larger or older in the grade levels to have
More
more
kids.
kids in the facility. But again, the idea is to break it down into smaller communities of students. So
Another consideration on elementary is trying to keep it on one level, because the younger kids have issues with climbing, and there's also code requirements that KN1 needs to be at the first floor level.
I can't
So
share.
that's sometimes that forces, as Mark says, is an intermediate level. Because larger elementary, the economy of scale is going on the second floor. So if you have a K through 5, you could do that. If you have a K through 2 or 3, half your population has to be on a lower level.
Mr. Smith?
Just a question, I don't know if it's for you or for Mr. Farrington, but for their future edification, should we plan on doing another presentation like this for the full board, or I don't know if you've thought about that yet, or how you want to proceed?
I mean, I kind of felt like this was the opportunity, we announced this to the full board, so I feel like that was their opportunity. They can certainly watch it. I do have a note that if we can get copies of these for every board member, I guess I'd also request that we make it available to the Board of Aldermen Construction Committee members.
All the studies are right here. So
Okay.
they got the two.
Also, just the Mount Pleasant PTO, could we make sure that they get the head of that gets a copy of the Mount Pleasant one? I don't remember whether the Elm Street PTO came in and talked to us about it, but I just know that they were very active, and I just want to let them see the results of the study.
I still have their pitchfork that they gave me, so I
Yes.
think we want to keep them in the loop.
Yes. Well, as long as they're after you, Howard, I mean, we have mixed feelings as to whether.
Well, no, I love that. Are you kidding me? I love it.
And I think we have to have a discussion at the board level as to what it is we think we need to do, and maybe a discussion with the mayor about, here's what we have in front of us. What's their thinking on bonding? I know that's sort of all up in the air now, given all the things that failed along the way that they thought they were gonna bond, so I don't know whether that means we moved up the list or not, or whether we just delayed even further. Mr. Green.
I guess in addition to that, the uncertainty around our election, the aldermanic election, coming into the holidays, I would expect we probably could wait until the first of the year and decide. Those are the people who are going to be making a lot of these decisions, and we ought to let them get in place, and then maybe we can have a big briefing of everybody. Or you can have, depending on how the elections go.
Yeah. The only other thing I can think that we might consider would be to start to look at those schools that aren't these schools, right, that we know will need, right? And so we may want to think about do we do that analysis now, just to see what that number looks like, or do we think we know that number is roughly where we are in the other schools? I don't even know what the issues are with combining things back together.
So that was, again, these open concept schools, Birch Hill, Maine Dunstable. You all did an estimate way back when. It's probably 5 or 6 years old.
That probably hasn't escalated.
Why, in fact,
Still good?
I
we'll
love
take
stuff.
this in a year, right?
But that only addressed construction things from a program standpoint. I don't believe there's ever a study on either building. Was there?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. So if we want to do that, something we need to discuss as well. And that number also didn't include projection systems.
Correct.
Stuff like
Those would have to be revisited as well. Be happy to do it.
Okay. Thanks, gentlemen, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice presentation. Thank you.
All right, let's try to do is apologize for that, but you came on a night that was busy. The night you weren't able to make it because you were sick, we had plenty of time. Yeah.
There's an easy connection into the projector.
I'm not sure easy is the right word for that.
There is a connection.
There is a connection.
If it's gonna work is another story.
Pull this down, Dan. Pull it down.
So we'll have the boards if we get them first.
Does this need to be?
Wow, someone who can reach.
Yeah.
Yes.
His arms come in handy sometimes.
I'm gonna get chairs actually. I guess when I'm sitting in it, it will actually go.
Bob, are you taking off?
I'm gonna stick around for a few minutes and see if we can get it wrapped up.
It's on, right? Motion's right.
It's doing something. Just thinking.
Dan, are there any transfers we need to approve that really need our approval?
Yeah, there is one.
All right, let's-
Here you go.
Ah, great. Is it possible to maybe lower the lights in this end of the room?
One of those, oh, maybe it's up there. I don't know. Dan, have you got the switch up there for the light?
This?
There.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I knew it all the way.
Good, well, are we waiting for?
Still waiting for,
Good, we'll let him return.
so Chairman.
Indeed.
So,
Thanks for your patience tonight.
There's important business you have. As a local taxpayer, I'm glad to know the amount of due diligence you put into this.
Well,
So I'm happy to be here.
are you from Nashua?
Yeah, my wife and I live on Shattuck Street, French Hill. We've got 2 little ones, 16 months old, so not yet school children here, but we're certainly looking forward to the day.
Twins?
Yeah,
Great.
Good luck to you.
yeah. We're alive so far.
so they might be going to Mount Pleasant, so
Yeah.
the tie-in.
So just to
Yeah.
preface this, so we've heard a number of solar presentations, so we probably don't need a lot of background on how solar works and that
Great.
sort of thing, so go ahead. Do you want to introduce them?
Oh, yeah, so you received 2 presentations so far. One was concerning becoming part of a solar farm. There are certain pluses and minuses to that. And the one before that was more of a leased option. So we don't own the equipment, we don't maintain the equipment, just we get the benefit from it. So this is the different approach, I believe, although we could also hire him to lease the same stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of the companies do that. You own it or else we own it. So Dan is to provide you own it lease.
Yes, although I'll show both options and kind of compare the cost saving potential. Well, thank you very much for the chance to speak with you. My name is Dan Weeks. As I just said, live here in Nashua. Grew up actually in Temple, New Hampshire, a couple towns to the west of here, but happy to be settled here with my wife and kids, and working in the renewable energy space with Revision Energy. Thought I would give a little bit of company background. You've heard from a couple of companies already. We're proud to be the industry leader in northern New England, started 14 years ago up in Maine, with now over 200 employees. So largest operating in New Hampshire and Maine, and recently expanded into Massachusetts. We've completed over 6,000 systems in that time, and also expanded beyond solar to other complementary technologies for energy efficiency, such as LED lighting and heat pumps, battery systems as well. We do all of our design and other work in-house. We do most of our installations in-house as well, with all the engineers, technicians, etc. And our mission is pretty simple: to accelerate the clean energy transition across New England. And specifically, we're proud to be a certified B Corp, a benefit corporation, which means we've legally obligated ourselves to operate for a broader mission beyond profits. We make profits to be sustainable and to advance our mission, but the reason we exist is to address the climate challenge, to accelerate the clean energy transition. And as an important part of our B Corp mission is working with schools, nonprofits, governments, other entities that cannot access the tax credit, which takes 30% off the cost of a solar installation, through power purchase agreements. Just a couple of, what just happened to my...
Is that Maine?
Rose. That is actually South Africa.
Well, while you're doing that, I forgot to mention, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, so you are a member of a committee in Nashua that looks at this sort of thing.
Correct. So I was appointed earlier this year. I'm so sorry, it quit unexpectedly. Appointed earlier this year to the Mayor's Environment and Energy Committee. And so that committee serves in an advisory function. I'm so sorry, let's get this. And so is not obviously a developer of projects, doesn't recommend or make any purchasing decisions. But given my background in clean energy, I was honored to be appointed by the mayor. Just a little bit more background in this PPA, power purchase agreement space. I'll say a little bit more about that, but I think you already have a decent idea. Revision specifically of the 6,000 systems we've developed, more than 100 are power purchase agreements with nonprofits totaling over 6 megawatts and $25 million. And then a subset of those smaller PPAs, we actually own and serve as an impact investor to make it more accessible to nonprofits that where the economies of scale aren't so great as to bring the cost down to a feasible level. So, for instance, the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter just a couple of weeks ago signed on. We will own that PPA, will provide financing at cost without making a profit on it, but it's a way to advance our mission. And briefly, some of the schools that we've done in recent years, as well as
Some of them are pretty small.
some are quite small. You know, early days we were seeing a lot wanting to do kind of pilot projects, 15, 20 kilowatts. But more recently, and there's a lot of other large ones in development, we're hearing every week from schools wanting to significantly scale up. Public sector solar projects, and I could go into any of these in detail if you want, and then sampling of nonprofit projects. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple of stories about our work with cities in particular. Claremont will be saving them $836,000 in electricity costs through the model that I'm going to recommend here of a power purchase agreement where ownership transfers to the Nashua School District. I'll get into that in a minute. Likewise, on the left, the town of Brentwood, similar savings through the same model. And we were very proud recently to be ranked the #1 solar company in New England. So a little bit of background, getting into power purchase agreements and the model that I would recommend, and I do speak here partly as a Nashua taxpayer, having looked in the minutes of this committee's meetings at some of the opportunities presented, I think there is some significant difference. So very briefly, I think you all have an understanding of this. The Nashua School District doesn't pay income taxes, therefore cannot access tax credits, which for a business or a homeowner like myself, we have a small array, would take 30% off the cost. And so in order to avoid a situation where you're paying that maximum cost at the front with typically a 20 or so year payback, which most nonprofits simply can't afford, we and others have evolved this power purchase agreement model where for a period of time between 6 and 30 years, you lease your roof or land to a third-party partner. We as the partner would develop and get the financing, do all of the work, but you would make your land or roof space available. You would purchase the power from this third party, Revision Energy and our financing partner. And then beginning in year 7, and I'll get into this in a little more detail, you would have the option to purchase the array at a significant discount because the financing partner has been able to realize the federal tax savings and then pass those on in the purchase or buyout price. And that is where we see maximum savings, which I'll get to in a moment. So again, the solar investor on the one side builds, owns, operates for a minimum of 6 years, recoups their investment through that tax credit depreciation and the energy payments that you make. There are not state grants or rebates. Some of the previous proposals were developed when there appeared to be state rebates. Unfortunately, those are no longer available, so we're not counting them in any of the cash flows that we've worked on. And then we pass on those savings by selling the array to the host, starting in year 7. And then the host, the school district, provides the space, net meters any excess solar generation, takes the electricity produced, and then has the option of acquiring the array year 7 or beyond at a significant discount. Thereafter, owning and operating, typically with an O&M contract, which for solar is actually very low cost because the technology, there's no moving parts, it's very easy to operate. So you don't have to worry about costs down the road.
So is it, for you, is it fully depreciated after 7 years?
That's correct.
And then, so if we didn't buy it, would you sell it to someone else?
No. The contract states that one of two things will happen. Either you will continue to purchase the electricity from the array while the array remains owned by the initial partner, or you buy the array
Okay.
and own the electricity.
I just didn't know if it was profitable for someone else to buy it and depreciate it.
No, at that point, it's been depreciated.
Okay.
And you use the word significant discount? I mean, 20%, 80% ballpark?
So typically, the bottom line there, 40 to 70%. The Nashua Soup Kitchen is about 60-something percent. But there are a number of factors that go into it, which I can get into greater detail.
Now, if we're talking our rooftops, so that, Mr. Smith, the lifetime of a roof is what, 15,
20 to 30 years.
20 to 30 years, okay.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't put this on a old roof.
Right, no, I mean, we had that conversation already, that a
Yeah.
certain subset of schools that have more recent roofs.
Yeah, and I'll show, we've zoomed in on a handful of schools that we think are the best prospects
But
for it.
can I, this is pretty lightweight in terms of, you're not, how are you attaching it to the building? So like, I mean, if we need to replace the roofs, right?
Right.
It's the kind of system that you could move off the roof
Right.
at some cost and then put it back on, right?
So typically, because the systems are built to last for over 40 years, they're warranted to produce at least 80% of their day one nameplate value. 25-year warranty, but that's about the halfway point of the life of the array, so longer than a typical EPDM roof. However, we don't make any protrusions into the roof. They're simply weighted on with kind of custom cinder blocks, about 6 pounds per square foot, so about 1/10 of snow load requirements in this region. So we almost never see structural issues, but of course we have an independent structural analysis done for code. It's generally somewhere between 10 and 20% of the upfront cost to remove, if you're replacing the roof, to take it off and then reinstall the array. Most of that cost goes into the equipment, the development upfront. So there's a cost, but it's small compared to a new array. So I think you have a sense of the structure. I thought it was worth spending a little bit of time on here on the long-term lease versus buyout option. There is a third option, which is to simply purchase the array up front. The school district, other public bodies can access low-cost bonds. 20-year bond you could purchase, and it would be cash flow positive from day one if you had low-cost financing. But typically, the savings are better in the case of a PPA, because that financing partner has been able to pass on the savings from the tax credit, which you wouldn't get if you bonded it on day one. However, if you choose the PPA route, which we would recommend, you can either enter a long-term lease arrangement, typically 20 to 30 years, and we offer those options up to 30 years, where you're buying the electricity at a fixed rate. The rates are typically a little bit below your current rate of grid electricity, and those savings gradually increase over time because it's fixed while the cost of grid electricity is going up. We project a conservative estimate of 2.5% a year. And so your projected savings add up, but they're typically on the order of 1/4 of what your savings are if you buy the array out, if you exercise the buyout option in year 7. So with that option, you enter that same long-term PPA agreement where you have the option, even if you intend to buy it out, you are not required to do so. You can continue to simply lease for that long period, 20 or 30 years. But you can exercise that option starting in year 7. And if you do, your rates begin to, every kilowatt hour of electricity you generate is free from the moment you own it. And so your savings begin to increase substantially. And I'll show some projections for the school district. So again, about 4 times the savings of a continued lease arrangement. And then once you buy it out, you do own the array. You're ultimately responsible, but most often in the case of a large institution, we would recommend, and we or someone else could provide, an O&M contract to guarantee production at that level.
So realistically, it's not free if you have maintenance. So what would a typical, is it an annual contract? Is it multi-year?
Typically an annual contract. I was pricing an array this afternoon for a smaller nonprofit, 50 kilowatts. So on the order of 1/10 the size of some of the arrays that we would recommend here. There we were looking at about $900 a year.
Oh, okay.
That rate will go down a little bit as the array increases in size, but a couple $1,000s up to $10,000, say. And we can work those into the cash flow.
Per school?
Yes, And our initial, every PPA that we price includes an O&M contract beyond the term of the PPA, so that's baked into our price estimates. But of course, that's an option which you aren't required to exercise.
Excuse me, I'm not clear. So it's about $1,000 per building, or is it $10,000 per building?
The honest answer is
It's
I
500.
haven't priced an O&M contract for a system of this size.
Okay,
The comparison I was giving you was for a system roughly a tenth the size, where the cost was in the $900 range per
Okay.
year. However, that is not a linear increase.
okay.
I just don't know offhand what our rate is for a larger system.
So if I said between 5 and 10,000, it might not.
That's
For
reasonable.
discussion purposes, we're
Yeah,
almost in the ballpark.
that is reasonable. I couldn't
Per
commit more than
building.
that.
No, but that's okay. We're just giving us a number, some point on a dot on a whiteboard.
Yeah.
The more schools you have, the more economies of scale you have.
Indeed. So I think there is a good chance, again, I can't commit this at this moment, but that because a lot of the cost is a fixed cost of sending an engineer out
Yep.
twice a year, it's easy to inspect a 500 kilowatt array, not that much more work than a 50 kilowatt. So it would be a significantly lower per kilowatt price, and I could get that information as a follow-up. So looking at the school district, we began, and I did have the chance to speak a little bit with Sean previously, looking at analysis done back in 2011 by the Jordan Institute. You may be familiar with this. In my capacity on the City Energy Committee, we've been digging into this report to find where a lot of our city consumption is. Sorry, it's rather small to read, but I've highlighted the 5 plus one more that's not on there, lower schools, elementary, middle schools, and then the 2 high schools that we believe are the best candidates with guidance from Sean. And specifically those schools, and I'll pull them up again in a moment, currently consume about 2,500 megawatt hours of electricity, the 5 lower schools per year. The 2 high schools consume about 8,200 megawatt hours of electricity per year. And the designs, which I'll show you in a moment, could offset 100% or more of the lower schools, but only about a third of the electricity at the 2 high schools. There are ways we could maximize to get closer to 50%, but I want to be clear up front. The city has the potential to generate 100% of its electricity at lower schools from solar on the roof, but only a third to half of the electricity at the high schools, which have just a much higher load. This is maybe the most important slide. So what we've done so far is, I'll show you the preliminary engineering work we've done, but based on what we could fit on these 5 schools, lower schools, plus the 2 high schools, and what the current market is from our investment partners to fund these arrays, we could offer, at the bottom there, a solar PPA rate of 7.7 cents per kilowatt hour, which compares, highlighted above, to your current rate of electricity at 8.3 cents per kilowatt hour. Not a huge difference, but lower, about 8% lower. I put the compare line in there because I was a little bit perplexed, and this was probably just previous data, maybe before the latest third-party supply agreement, electricity agreement that the school district has entered into. But I was a little surprised that the Sunrays proposal presented assumed a current electricity rate of 13 cents a kilowatt hour as opposed to 8.3 cents. A big delta, which will obviously produce very different projections in terms of savings. That is based on our information from Sean, the current offset rate. And then the rate that we can offer, 7.7 cents per kilowatt hour, for the price you would pay to purchase electricity from an array that we would install and own on 1 or all 7 of these schools, compares to about 9.5 cents that the Sunrays proposal is offering. I can get into...
Can I just ask a question, Mr. Smith? If I recall correctly, we last year we entered into a 3-year...
Actually, this coming November,
It's
we
this year it
start
starts?
3
Okay, I'm
years.
sorry.
I want to say that the per kilowatt price is more like 0.79 or
So that is correct, the supply cost. We do add to this the T&D, transmission distribution cost, which you're obligated to pay to Eversource.
To Eversource, right?
Correct. Just to kind of flag that up front, the rate we can offer based on current financing, current EPC costs is 7.7 cents for between 1 and all 7 schools. Possibility of even lower rates if we were to build out to all 7 schools, which is significantly below what I've currently seen. So the specifics, and I'll leave this with you in the folders, but these are the 7 schools, 8 lines there because North High School has both a rooftop and a ground mount opportunity. I'll show you the preliminary engineering. Without getting too much into the weeds here, you see the array size, and I'll flip ahead to this. So these are the 7, and I do have printouts in the folders here. But this is the preliminary engineering layouts we've done for each of them. Flat roofs, it's a simple ballasted 10-degree construction. There are some nice pitched roofs where we don't need to use as much equipment. We don't have the full ballasting. It's simply directly adhered to the roof, and because it's at a pitch south face, there's a somewhat higher efficiency because it's a somewhat higher pitch than the 10 degrees on a flat roof. I can get into the designs in greater detail if you'd like, but those are the inputs there for the array size column. That also gives us, when we run those helioscope analyses in the preliminary engineering, we get a production estimate per year for the exact latitude and longitude of the facility with shading considerations as well. And so that gives us, you see at the bottom there, so a total of more than 5 megawatts of potential production on those 7 schools. About 2.5 would be on the 5 lower schools, which have recently updated roofs. Another 2.5 on the 2 high schools whose roofs are older. And so that would be a consideration. It might be something you would want to delay. Total production of close to 6 million kilowatt hours per year, which is how I get the offset. Again, 100% plus for the lower schools, about 35% for the high schools. And then the savings per year, and at a later date I could get into the individual cash flows we've run for each of the schools, but the savings per year, if you were to take the PPA lease option, so you enter into the power purchase agreement, and for the full period, 20 or 30 years, you simply lease at a lower rate, that will give you savings per year around 10 to 15,000 per school, greater at the high schools, or a total for the district of 122,000 per year. A fairly small slice of your electricity budget. Whereas if you exercise that buyout option, you're at about 4 times the rate, 450,000 per year, or total 40-year savings, and I'll show the graphs in a moment, of about $18.3 million.
I have a crazy question. Could you do both implementations at North? Is there anything precluding that? I mean, could you go
certainly
roof
could.
and ground, right?
You certainly could. In terms of the electrical interconnection, it's 3-phase, 480-volt power. You have the ability to tie.
Just goes onto the grid, right?
It goes onto the grid. It's used first on site. Any excess
Really?
generation is then exported to the neighborhoods.
Oh, see, I understood. Oh, this is good. This is interesting. So technically, it's consumed first, excess goes onto the grid. I thought with net metering, they required everything to be sold to the grid, and you just bought what you needed.
You first consume based
Okay.
on current behind-the-meter load, and
Okay.
then any excess production is automatically exported onto the grid. And because the high schools have very high load, the fact that you would use it all behind the meter is a benefit because you don't have to concern yourself with net metering, where there's a small penalty the utilities assess. In other words, paying you somewhat less for exported electricity than you pay for imported electricity.
Except during the summer, because you're not going to be using enough electricity.
So that is a question about load. Would air-conditioned systems be running? Those are typically the big driver of increased summer load.
You know, not at a level eat up enough, especially because that's gonna be your peak
Kids aren't there.
production.
I think at the lower schools, that would be an issue where we could offset 100%. At the high schools, probably not, because your offset is only about 35%.
So excuse me,
Please.
the savings per year and the PPA buyout, is that based on the same rate as you use to determine the first year, or do you add some kind of a factor in there for it's 7 years later, is there any assumption for an increased utility cost?
So the
comparison?
assumption there is a 2.5% escalator,
Okay.
2.5% inflation in utility prices. I did notice in the Sunrise proposal, they're assuming a 3.5%. We have seen inflation on that order of electricity costs. We try to be conservative in all our projections. If you were to assume 3.5, those projected savings of 18% would be closer to 30 million. 18 million would be closer to 30 million.
Is there any local storage?
That is technically possible, and our company does install battery systems. However, I would say the technology is a couple of years away from maturity, and so the cost, the value proposition will not be very good. In the last month, we finally received our first Tesla Powerwall 2s. We are the certified installer for this region, so we've installed a few already. But those are providing backup for a home. You would need a significant bank of them to cover a school, and the cost right now is on the order of 10,000 apiece.
There's a company in Massachusetts, Schneider Electric. You may want to look into what
Yeah.
they're doing. They have some very interesting rack-mounted
Yeah,
kilowatt at the size of a CPU server.
Yeah.
Each of them is, I think, 5 or, it's very interesting. I was
Yeah.
poking there about a year ago.
terrific. We
And
do
they do
install
entire, office buildings is what their market is.
Terrific. We do install an array of different battery products. Sonnen is another popular one. Pika Energy is main-based. We would be happy to run some pricing for you. However, I can say it will not have
Too early.
the kind of payback.
No
period.
flywheels, so we don't want to go there yet.
Yeah, coming. It's certainly on its way and very exciting.
Question, the 458 does not include your cost for, or our cost for buying the systems from you, right? So is that,
That-
whatever that cost of money is,
That is the full cost of, that is assuming that you buy the systems. And we have estimates of what the cost would be. So that is basically taking the long-term savings, and in the cash flows, you see the purchase price is built in. You have a several-year period, basically payback period, simply dividing the long-term savings by 40 years.
You say you have something showing that?
Yes.
And I would also ask, do you have an image that would show where for the North High School roof and ground?
So I can flip forward here. You see north in the upper left and ground right below it.
Behind the school.
So it's behind the school, between the school and the river.
Okay.
I know the marching band does use that for practice, so they're,
Could they go in between there, right?
that would be,
We would be smart if we could go.
I think in a purchase, they're oblique move, I think.
now, you do see there's a number of roof sections on north that are not filled. We do have the potential to maximize, so we could fit more on the roofs, but that was kind of our.
Now, were they pitched, or you just didn't?
So they look much like this. It's a gentle pitch, about 10 degrees, with ballasting. You see the cinder block in the foreground.
Yeah.
That's in order to avoid having to make any protrusions. Ideal pitch at this latitude is about 38 degrees. However, that raises wind concerns and it causes increased shading. So you can fit fewer panels. We found this to be the highest value design for a flat roof installation.
But back to Mr. Donovan's question. Okay, thank you. So potentially could add more area to north, but the reason why it's not there now, if you could give us an idea?
So when our engineers, they look at detailed satellite imagery, try to factor in account for rooftop units, which require a fair amount of access in order to be serviced on an ongoing basis. And so the other areas were not as efficient. We'd rather build a large bank on a single roof section than a lot of small piecemeal parts. There's more wiring required, somewhat more installation time. So we could pick additional sections, but the cost per kilowatt hour is going to be slightly more. Again, very slightly more, so I think if a decision was made that the ground mount wasn't a good option, we wanted to maximize the roof space, we would come back with another proposal to take it from the current estimate of 580 kilowatts. I think we could get up over 700 kilowatts, but at a slightly lower efficiency design. So again, a couple of graphs here. Now the purchase option, if the school district was to bond such a project, the primary reason that nonprofits utilize a PPA is to stay cash flow neutral at the outset, and then to have the option of remaining cash flow neutral without any purchase if they simply extend that leasing arrangement. But most will then exercise the buyout option for a lower cost purchase in year 7 and then see those savings increase. Because the school district pays a very competitive price for electricity currently, the savings, the PPA line is not as, it would typically be a bit above the purchase line when we work with other nonprofits who are paying more for electricity. In this case, purchasing out front with an O&M contract presumably would be a good option to also consider. But I think the bottom line point I would make, and this illustrates it, is the sooner you can buy it out, the lower your long-term rate of electricity. About 5 cents with that 7-year buyout. Not too much more, closer to 6 cents with the year 21 buyout. It would be a little over 6 cents if you went to 30 years. That's the 40-year cost. Or a purchase, direct purchase would be a little below 5 cents. Compare that to the long-term projected cost of electricity at about 14 cents with the 2.5% annual inflation. And so that gives us, the left side here in gray, $29 million is your projected cost of electricity at these 7 schools for the amount that you could supply with solar. So 100% of the lower schools, 35% of the high schools. School district is projected to spend $29 million over the next 40 years. Going the solar route would cost the district a little under $11 million, which gives that delta in savings of about $18 million. So that's the kind of basics of the design. Most of the roofs are flat, so it would look much like this. A bank of inverters in the basement, in the utility room. The design, the equipment itself is remarkably simple, no moving parts. The inverters typically last 20 years. We bake into the cash flows a replacement in year 21, but they're a modest expense compared to the project total cost. Again, the solar modules themselves will continue to produce over 40 years. I think that may be enough. I just thought a couple of fact points were interesting here. The projected savings in terms of the environmental benefits are enormous, and I could go through some more of those if you're interested. But I would maybe end with the point that part of our B Corp mission as a company is education, and especially focused on the next generation. And so in every project we install, we have live monitoring in the lobby. We have monitoring via apps or just via internet browser that classes can use. We very regularly go into schools, send our engineers in to talk to engineering classes or other classes. And so part of why we would be very excited to work with Nashua and why we enjoy working with other schools is that opportunity to really be raising awareness among students and involving them as a learning opportunity. So thanks for hearing me out, and I know it is getting late. I'll send these around. Have a little bit more about the company and just the very brief kind of two-page overview of this proposal. Obviously, there's a lot more development work that would be required if and when the school district wants to move to a formal project. So I didn't include the individual cash flows as yet, but would be happy to take that next step as and when this committee and the school board is ready.
Thank you very much. I think it was a good,
Yeah.
we've had a good mix of these presentations, and I think yours topped them, so it's good. Any
Just
other
one quick
last minute
question.
questions?
What I found talking to, I think, the solar farm people was because we are pretty much locked into a contract with a third party, that third party put that number for us, thinking that this is how much the consumption was going to be. So then they had to go out, I guess, in the futures market and buy that much kilowatt hours or whatever. The company that we're currently supposed to start with in November has indicated that there'd be a penalty if we reduced our consumption by, significantly, whatever that
Yeah.
significant word is. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Sean. You were kind enough to share that supply agreement with us, and I had our financing team take a look. We have frequently, in the 100-plus PPA projects we've built so far, run into supply agreements. Most large users of electricity are smart shoppers, and so buying on the third-party market. Because the total offset for the school district that we're talking about here is fairly small, I can flip back here. So the school district is currently consuming 14 million kilowatt hours per year, spending over $2 million a year. This is, again, the 2011 data, so it's a
Still
bit out
pretty
of date.
close, though.
Because this would represent a relatively, especially if we didn't proceed with the high schools for roof issues, we would be talking about a pretty small fraction. Our experience has been that they are not going to want to risk their relationship with you as such a large purchaser of electricity, that if it's a fairly small offset on the order of 10%, maybe 20%, our experience has been that that doesn't affect the agreements, but that is an one-on-one negotiation. So I can't guarantee that that's the case.
Good.
Well, so I have a question for you. Let's say we went and went ahead and we have all this equipment on site. What's the opportunity for some kind of program development where our students can learn to install these things, or I'm not saying repair, but in other words, we're all about trying to get jobs for our kids, okay? So here's an up and coming, going to be around the
Can we
world.
just let him answer?
I'm sorry.
I just want to move it along. So
Sorry.
do you have any sort of internships, I think is how it's
Yeah,
talked about.
so we have regular internships, apprenticeship programs. We're always looking for and hiring electricians, other people with NAC certifications. And so, and we will take those interns on, provide them the training, the required hours to get their certification while being paid employees. We have currently about 100 employees in New Hampshire. We've grown, been growing 20 to 30% a year, so we anticipate a significant workforce need, which is part of our motivation to go to high schools in particular, also the community colleges, where we're developing a number of similar projects.
So, and I know Bob's, and correctly so, we all want to get out of here. I would include that in your presentation for
Thank
other
you.
schools, because
Thank you
it's
for
a big
mentioning
deal to us.
Well,
right
particularly here, because we have the
Yeah.
CTE program.
Yeah,
which
we're a
does have an
regional
electrical
center, so.
component to
Right.
it, right? So it could be valuable.
At a bare minimum, we would enthusiastically, whether we install or not, we would enthusiastically send engineers out to talk to classes, to give them a kind of
Thank you.
introduction to the field.
Thanks, appreciate it, Tim.
Okay, thanks for your time. My contact details are in there as well, so feel free to get in touch.
Great, thank you.
Can you send us a copy of the PowerPoint? Just Sean?
I'd be happy to.
That'd be great.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen, gonna get you out of here. Contracts we need to vote on this evening.
Thank you.
Yes, there is one contract with Siemens. As you're probably aware, we have two HVAC maintenance agreements. One's with Control Technologies. That was a 3-year deal that we approved 2 years ago. Siemens is more of an annual one. This covers 4 of the schools and this building. Sole source vendor because it's their equipment, they're the ones that do the work. So it's a $207 increase from last year.
I see that.
Is this equipment going out of, is it becoming obsolete?
This seem, no, it's this,
The equipment in this contract is still current and is serviceable?
Yes. yes.
Okay.
Move to approve the HVAC equipment maintenance for Bicentennial Amherst and Dr. Crisp at a cost of $14,713.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kaufman. Any questions? None. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion passes. What's next?
okay.
Just a real quick thing. Next year that'll go up because we're adding Sunset Heights. They're currently on a 1-year warranty. So next year we'll have that in.
All right.
Okay, the second thing is just basically, as you're probably aware, we have the capital equipment replacement fund, SURF fund. It's in our budget. I mean, it's at the city level. They budget it, but they give us certain funds. There's a spreadsheet where we track things. So Sean, I think we lost one vehicle during the whole budget process, but we were given approximately $114,000. So I just want to tell them quick what you're going to purchase.
No, because I don't have it in front of me.
All
All right, we'll do that at some other meeting. What's next?
Yeah, so we're replacing our couple of trades vehicles. We're getting a new Ford F-350, which includes the dump body, the plow, and everything else goes with it. And the other is a box fan for one of the tradesmen. Third thing we're getting is a compressor. We use that for blowing out irrigation lines in all the fields. We need something that's portable, good size. And the one we had is circa 1988, so we got our money's worth out of that one, but it's on its last legs. So again, this is a process the city has in place. It's something we participate in every year.
Is that?
So,
Move to approve, move to accept and place on file the FY18 September financial report.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kaufman. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed. Mrs. Donovan, is there anything to report in that we need to know about? I'll give you one item you can tell us.
no, the only thing is the retirement and separation pay line. It's a little bit over budget. Well, it's over budget right now, mostly due to the administrative people that left, a couple of CT director, a couple of principals. But we paid all the teachers that were in the budget except for 2. There's 2 left. I'll find out why they haven't been paid yet. Either maybe they changed their mind or they just haven't filed all their paperwork. But that number, which is $900,000 at this point, will not be going up too much more because, like I said, most of them are paid out.
Okay. September file transfer report.
Yes, there's the $92,000 transfer entry, which is to hire the 2 teachers at, the 2 teachers, one at Broad Street and one at New Searles. You approved that as a board back about a month ago, but this is the actual entry going through. And the other ones are pretty much purchasing chairs. The high schools had a lot of issues with chair breakage, and so I've sort of pushed them to use their own funds to purchase the chairs. So they haven't had a lot of extra money. And that's pretty much it.
Move to approve the FY18 September transfers and accept and place on file the report.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kaufman. Discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed. Motion passes. What else we got, Mr. Cinnamon?
That is it.
That is it. Mr. Kaufman.
Move to adjourn.
Adjourned, seconded by Mr. Hollowell. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed. Motion passes. We're adjourned at 9:02.